So let me start by setting the scene, which is I'm at a conference sponsored by the White House on what they call smart disclosure, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. We have 300 civil servants from all branches of government, and I have the crack team from Ideas 42 running things and causing trouble. Is there somebody here from Ideas 42? Yeah. So this is their messing up. So here's what we did. 2 days before the conference started, we sent everybody an email saying that the conference is oversubscribed, so please let us know if you're going to come. By the way, the default option for lunch is a healthy option. If you read, this is what it was. Bean sprout and soy cheese sandwich on gluten-free soda bread. And, so 80% of the people failed to opt out of that lunch. Then the disclosure kind of went on and on, like the one Eric showed. If you got all the way to the bottom, you got to read, summit participants who carefully reviewed all these disclosures may be eligible for a special reward. Click here. 1% did that. So this is not smart disclosure. This is dumb disclosure. And the question is, what's the alternative? So let me describe a model that I don't think anyone can possibly object to. But we'll see. The model is that the government creates some data, so we own it. We then release the data in some open source format. The private sector finds out some way to make use of those data. Consumers are happy, firms make money, right? What's not to like? So, yeah, we can even create jobs. So here's one example of that, GPS. So originally this was a DoD initiative. They sent up satellites that sent down images. They then released that data to the public, originally with some error built in for some DoD reason. President Clinton decided to eliminate that, and now we all get lost less often. Second example, the National Weather Service has traditionally just produced forecasts. Now they release data. So they release all the information they've gathered that they put into their models to make forecasts, but those raw data are available to any private company. So now if you own an orange orchard in Florida and you want to know the probability of a frost tonight, you can buy a special forecast that will be within 100 meters of where the frost line will be. Coming sometime soon, maybe in your next car, your GPS will switch your route, not just because of a traffic jam, but because of a thunderstorm that's coming in your way. Okay, so I talk about the field of dreams. If you release the data, the apps will come. And this smart disclosure initiative is the next step. Now, I should say, this is an idea that appears in that book that John put up. And Cass and I came up with the brilliant name for this idea that we called RECAP, which I believe was an acronym for something. And I can't remember what it was. So I think smart disclosure was a good marketing move to change the name from RECAP. So the president has been pursuing this initiative literally from his first day of office. So here's an executive order that a former co-author of mine wrote. You can guess who. And the bottom line is the blue part is the key. It essentially says that in my administration, the default option will be to release data that we have and, where possible, in machine-readable format. So I've also been working closely with the coalition government in the UK, and in the coalition agreement, there was a similar statement. We'll create a new right to data so that government-held data sets can be requested and used by the public, and then published on a regular basis. So I'm going to give you an update on what's been happening. So there are two domains in which this phrase smart disclosure is used. One is public data, which is what I've been talking about so far. The other is private sector data, and I'll get into that. And then in the private sector, we're talking about two kinds of data. One is data on prices and attributes. So think of a calling plan. It would list all the tariffs. The other would be personal usage data. So imagine you go to a supermarket and belong to a shoppers club. They know every purchase you've made. I believe, and it's the law in the UK, that you should own your own usage data. So let me make one thing clear about that. I believe you should own your data. I don't think you should own the inferences that companies have drawn from that. So for example, you would have the right to get the list of books you've bought from Amazon, but not the formula they use to predict what other books you would want. So what does this have to do with behavioral economics? In Nudge, we talk about the difference between humans and econs. Humans have trouble with complicated things. The world is getting more complicated. Mortgages used to be 30-year fixed, and the Truth in Lending Act was enough. Just get everybody to agree on reporting interest rates the same way, find the lowest rate, and you're done. Now, with lots of complicated aspects of mortgages, that's no longer the case. One of my colleagues in London has calculated that there are 12 million different calling plans in Britain, which is almost as many as there are people. So in order to make a good choice for the calling plans, you need the usage data, which you can kind of get from your smartphone, but of course not quite in the way you would want it in order to choose the plan. So how can we take modern technology and turn human consumers into econs? That's really my modest goal here. So when I go around, I just was in London for a week working with the behavioral insight team, as they're called. And in every meeting with civil servants, I always say that our mantra is make it easy. And so this is going to live up to that mantra. So here's an example. This will relate to the talk Eric gave the other day. In the Bush administration, W, there was a new entitlement that was offered. In John's honor, I'll say that you can tell it was a Republican entitlement because it had lots of choices and competition and wasn't funded. So, now the idea of offering lots of choices, so there are 40 or 50 different insurance policies in each state. that will work exactly as well as people choose, right? So if people make poor choices of insurance plans, then having lots of choices doesn't do anybody any good. And there were early studies that suggested that people were finding this hard. An early study that Sendel and some colleagues did suggested that people could have saved $300 or $400 a year by picking a better plan than the one they did. So how to find out exactly how hard this is, I decided to take the well-worn strategy of both scientists and journalists, self-experimentation. So I used Christopher Hitchens as my model. He set out to determine whether waterboarding was torture, so had himself waterboarded and concluded that it was torture. I did the same. So while we were writing the book, a friend of mine gave me a list of her mother's prescriptions and invited me to go have fun and try to choose the best insurance policy for her mother. And I also decided that that was torture. The first thing you had to do was type in the names of all the drugs. Names of drugs are like strings of random letters. So typing them in properly is hard. There was no spell checker, no did you mean. So after 2 hours I gave up and declared it torture. The website is much better now, but here's a fact. After the first year, they know what drugs you're taking because they were your supplier of drugs last year. So how about, here's an idea, fill in the form for you. So that's happening. It's a few months away, but there's something called Blue Button, which I'll get to in a second. But it will now be possible, I'm hoping by November, but certainly at least by the following November, that when seniors have to re-enroll in this plan, the form will be what's called pre-populated with all the drugs you took last year, and you can start with that step. So that's providing usage data from the government. This is already live for what some of my research assistants have told me is the hardest part of getting into college, which is filling out the student aid application. You need tax return data to get the loan from the government. Well, guess who knows the tax return data? The government. So they are now, again, pre-populating those forms, which will make it easy. So Blue Button is the first initiative that was launched, surprisingly by the Veterans Administration, of all places. It's now possible for a veteran to have all of his or her medical records on a smartphone. And there are already 800,000 people that have used that. And lots of private parties are contributing. There are lots of other buttons that I won't go into. There's a green button and a gold button. So let's talk about the private sector because this is the more controversial part and maybe more interesting. So I would argue that complexity has made what they call plain English disclosure impossible. It's equally possible to explain the calling plan on my iPhone as it is to explain how the iPhone works. Impossible. So, and that's true for lots of things. As I mentioned earlier today, financial literacy is a good thing. but we're never going to get to the, all of us struggle with these decisions. We're not going to get everybody trained up to our level. And so, yes, let's educate people when we can, but more important, let's make it easy. So here's a disclosure. I'll let you read it, and you see if you can make any sense of this. Okay, so this is just 2 paragraphs from the 40 pages that come with your annual new credit card statement that you're asked to sign. I guess we could parse this if we worked at it hard enough, but it's not that helpful. So since we can't really do plain English disclosure anymore, let's try electronic disclosure. So here's the principle I'm advocating. Consumers should know should know how much they're going to pay, and they should have machine-readable access to their own usage data. Now, what would they do with that? Well, they would, with one click, upload that data to websites that we're calling choice engines. A good way to think of a choice engine is think about travel websites. So travel websites, that world I view as kind of like a B+, A- shopping experience. There's lots of competing websites, and there are aggregators like Kayak that are allowing you to shop across the different websites. If I'd get it up to an A if the FAA is trying to get the airlines to agree to provide fees as well as fares. If we did that, then that market would work about the way I want other markets to work. So we want to get consumers to be smarter. We want to create a market. So here's who are the winners and losers in the world I'm trying to create. The winners are going to be firms that provide good value for money. The losers will be firms that are making money through obfuscation and deception. Now, that will tell you where the battle lines will come on various proposals to impose this kind of disclosure on the private sector. So, for example, when the FAA was trying to get the rule passed about baggage fees and so forth, Southwest said, great, because they don't have any of those fees, and all the other airlines are fighting it. Eventually, I think this has the potential to eliminate many of the things regulators are now doing. So imagine Richard Cordray's job of being the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau head, and people are always getting mad about one fee or another, and we've seen in recent years how that works, that a regulator says you can't have that fee, so the bankers have to think of some other fee. If every fee is transparent, then I see almost no reason to regulate what fees you can charge and what you can't. I think we're going to create a whole new industry of choice engines. So consider, suppose we make the Shoppers Club data available. What might someone do with that? Well, suppose you have a kid with a peanut allergy. You upload your year's worth of purchases at Safeway to nopeanut.com, and they'll redline all the stuff you should stop buying. If you're trying to go on a diet, they'll redline, here are, the low-hanging fruit, that if you got rid of that stuff, that would be a good place to start. Here are ways to make money, save money. Consider the store brands. Now, it's important to stress that the government is not doing anything here. In my world, the government is simply requiring firms to release data in machine-readable, downloadable form. Now, let's have some caveats. The first is you don't want to impose large costs on firms or agencies that are being asked to provide these data. It's certain that firms will complain that providing these data is terribly, terribly costly. I think in most cases that will be bullshit. If they're collecting the data and it's on their computers, they're using it all the time to figure out what coupon to put on the back of your receipt. It can't be that hard to give you a file with that information. Here's a nice example. Social Security has switched to smart disclosure. Why? They realized how much it was costing to send that annual statement out each year. And wouldn't it be easier to send an email? So soon you will be able to download your entire history, then upload that to a website like Larry Kotlikoff has one website that would enable you to make some calculations about what's the best date that you should start claiming for Social Security. That piece of paper was more or less useless. We have to be careful that the regulator not hinder innovation. So suppose we had smart disclosure when somebody invented the iPhone, and now you can buy a song on your iPhone. That didn't used to be possible. So a bad world is the regulator says, sorry, you can't offer that service because we don't have that line on the form. So we need the regulator's default option to be that when a new service is created, a new line of code gets created. The choice engines, we need to worry about what the business models they will have. So the travel websites like Expedia and Orbitz get paid by airlines and hotels. Probably most people don't know that. Kayak is advertising-based model. So in Britain, we're insisting that that all the business plans of the choice engines be transparent. And we probably have to do a little bit more than that. We will need to at least monitor the choice engines, but I think Kayak-like websites can do some of the monitoring itself. So we can have the market monitor itself, possibly. And then this will not serve everyone. So we still need to worry about the people who aren't online, although that segment of the population is shrinking. I think the right model for dealing with that is some version of what Eldar and Sendel called plain vanilla, what I now prefer to call easy. And the idea would be you set up, say, for mortgages, 2 or 3 standard mortgages, and nobody would be required to offer such a mortgage, but if they want the easy label, they have to adopt a set of rules. Think of it as like a standard form lease. And so all fixed rate 30-year easy mortgages would have exactly the same set of terms and would work kind of the way 401k plans work now, where you would say, look, if you don't know what you're doing, we recommend that you take one of the easy options because there's nothing hidden there. If you want to, just like the default investment vehicle, but you know, if you're more sophisticated, then go over here, but try one of these choice engines to help. Here's my wish list. This is the world of mortgages, the way I would like to see it. That big pile of documents that you sign but don't read would be replaced by a memory stick or encrypted file. So imagine somebody offers you a mortgage. All the terms of that mortgage are on that memory stick. You stick it into your laptop. You go to mortgagesearcher.com. Mortgage Searcher will first redline the things in that contract that you want no part of and suggest you look for a mortgage that doesn't have those things. And would also help you shop. Getting more ambitious, I think we should do the same with all mortgage-backed securities. Mortgage-backed securities, one of the problems is they were really opaque. Even professional investors didn't really know the details. So you have this security that has slices of 10,000 mortgages, and investors knew not much more than that, except the rating from the rating agency. Now, if you make the innards of that mortgage-backed security transparent, you don't need rating agencies anymore. Anybody with a computer can enter the rating agency business. And I think with enough smart disclosure, we can gradually eliminate the need for rating agencies. Obviously, you can see I'm a salesman for this product. Unlike some statements that were made about me, I'm not actually selling this to anybody. All the work I do for this is free. And, oops, I guess that must have been the last thing I have to say. I'm going to try to kill that. Oh, that's good. Let's leave with that. Open source format. The private sector finds out some way to make use of those data. Consumers are happy. Firms make money. Right? What's not to like? So, yeah, we can even create jobs. So here's one example of that, GPS. So originally this was a DoD initiative. They sent up satellites that sent down images. They then released that data to the public, originally with some error built in for some DoD reason. President Clinton decided to eliminate that, and now we all get lost less often. Second example. So let me start by setting the scene, which is I'm at a conference sponsored by the White House on what they call smart disclosure, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. We have 300 civil servants from all branches of government, and I have the crack team from Ideas 42 running things and causing trouble. Is there somebody here from Ideas 42? Yeah. So this is their messing up. So here's what, like the one Eric showed. If you got all the way to the bottom, you got to read summit participants who carefully reviewed all these disclosures may be eligible for a special reward. Click here, 1% did that. So this is not smart disclosure. This is dumb disclosure. And the question is, what's the alternative? So let me describe a model that I don't think anyone can possibly object to. But we'll see. The model is that the government creates some data, so we own it. We then release the data in some. We did. 2 days before the conference started, we sent everybody an email saying that the conference is oversubscribed, so please let us know if you're going to come. By the way, the default option for lunch is a healthy option. If you read, this is what it was. Bean sprout and soy cheese sandwich on gluten-free soda bread. And, so 80% of the people failed to opt out of that lunch. Then the disclosure kind of went on and on. National Weather Service has traditionally just produced forecasts. Now they release data. So they release all the information they've gathered that they put into their models to make forecasts. But those raw data are available to any private company. So now if you own an orange orchard in Florida and you want to know the probability of a frost tonight, you can buy a special forecast that will be within 100 meters of where the frost line will be. Coming sometime soon, maybe